Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Protecting Your Practice, HR Compliance, Internal Controls, and Embezzlement Prevention. I am so excited to welcome one of our new partners, Wisdom, onto today's session. We're going to be diving into one of the most critical parts of running your practice, and often the one or two or three that is the most overlooked. So before we get into it, if you have not been to one of our webinars before that I've done, my name is Jill Hasselman. I am the CGO of HR for Health, and I have been with HR for Health for over 12 years at this point. And I have a fun perspective on the topic of compliance because over the years, I've not only managed my own teams internally and have really seen how critical these systems and processes are to making or breaking success. But I've also had exposure to thousands of our clients and the struggles that they face when it comes to managing their team, keeping up with all of these regulations. And I'm super excited to have Ashley with me today, not just because Wisdom's a new partner of ours, but because HR compliance and financial oversight are much more connected than people realize. So I would like to introduce Ashley Bond. She is the co-founder and chief dental billing officer at Wisdom. She has a ton of knowledge on the subject of dental billing, what to look out for, how to avoid mistakes, what to do about it. And I can tell you, when Ashley and I were prepping for this webinar, she had so much amazing content to contribute to this subject. So you are all really in for a treat today. So welcome, Ashley. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
All right. So let's start to dive into it. As I mentioned, most practices think about HR compliance and financial oversight as kind of separate responsibilities, but the reality is the risks that HR for Health is focused on preventing, those risks around employee claims and compliance violations, those operational issues that impact team members, et cetera, these are stemming from the same root cause that break down on the financial safeguard side of things. They stem from having weak policies or inconsistent processes, poor documentation, limited oversight. And so what we're going to really dive into today is understanding how to identify these things and provide you with some resources at the end to help you to start addressing them. So I want to start with a baseline of why managing your risk matters. And then we're going to dive into some of the HR risks and financial risks that you might not even be aware of right now, or maybe you are aware of, but you're not really sure what they mean or what to do with them. We're going to talk about how these pieces overlap. And like I mentioned, we'll have some really good resources. We just worked on a new resource with Wisdom to co-create that of a 90-day plan of what to do next. So we will also do our best to leave time for Q&A at the end. So you can see there's a chat box. There's also a Q&A box. Please feel free to submit your questions. If for whatever reason we don't have time to get to them, or maybe your question is very specific to you that, we might want to take offline, either Ashley or our team will reach out to you post-webinar so that we can talk about those things more directly. So let's jump into it. Why do we care about this? Why is risk management an important topic? And I understand that, the HR compliance, the financial oversight, embezzlement, these topics can feel very heavy, very complex, very difficult to navigate. But the reality is they are absolutely something that needs focus in the practice because there is a financial risk for ignoring compliance around these things, for not having these essential systems in place to manage your team. So the first one is turnover costs. It is super expensive to replace an employee, really for any employee, but especially if an employee issue is related to embezzlement or your financial systems, which I'll let Ashley talk about a little bit in a sec. But those are even more costly. That person is typically very highly paid. Your collections, your billing can be impacted by that person. So it's really important that you're paying attention to this and trying to avoid that turnover, or if it needs to happen, you're prepared to deal with that. Then you have the fines that come from just ignoring your HR laws and regulations. And with all my years of being in this space, I do know deep down that this isn't intentional by most of the practices out there. It's really hard and it's a lot to keep up on, and it can feel overwhelming. But unfortunately, ignorance is not a defense that can be used if there are violations happening. So it's really important that this stays top of mind. That's a big reason why HR for Health is here, is to help provide these resources and have you in the know of what's changing and what to do with those things. So really important that you're paying attention to those, because those are just like fines that happen. You can't really avoid them. And I want to let Ashley chime in on some of these additional pieces too.
Yeah, so unfortunately in our industry, embezzlement and fraud, it is widespread. And we know that 3 out of 5 dentists will be embezzled from in their career. I grew up in my father's dental practice, and unfortunately, he was one of those dentists. So it does happen even when you don't think it will. So that's why we're really passionate about talking about how to prevent this. Profit loss. So many offices that we see that they are, their production might be high, but we're not collecting the money. And $16 billion every year in the US goes uncollected by dental practices. So my mission is to hope to get that number down more and more. And then there's wasted time. So when you do have errors, it takes away from the valuable time. Everyone wishes we had more time in the dental practice. I swear, there's always a fire going on. You're wearing 10 hats, especially if you're working up front. So when you do have these errors, you don't have the right systems in place, you are wasting that valuable time that you really need for your practice, and that can hurt your reputation. I know in my father's practice, reputation is everything in dentistry. They can go to a dentist down the street. So your reputation really does matter. And that is, attracting the right people into your practice, but then the right patients. And if you don't have the right systems in place for even knowing if you have the right person in the right seat, it could unfortunately lead to some reputational damage.
And if this is starting to raise your blood pressure, it's okay. First of all, I have my candle in the background so that we have Zen vibes for this webinar, but we're going to talk about, again, some of the core points that help you to identify how to address these things and really what to look for. And so at a high level, on the left-hand side, you'll see some of the most common issues we see in the dental space when it comes to HR risks. There are tons and tons of them, but these are really the low-hanging fruit, kind of the non-negotiables that do lead to bigger issues. So this includes incorrectly classifying employees. So this could mean classifying somebody as a 1099 that should not be a 1099 or an independent contractor, or classifying them as exempt when they are not eligible to be exempt. And more on that in a minute. We'll break that down for you. Then you have inaccurate timekeeping. So this could mean not paying employees overtime, or not giving them lunches and breaks if your state requires it, or just not having them clock in and out at all. So we'll talk through that a little bit more. And we also have trends around not staying up to date on employment laws and adjusting your policies and how you're operating based on these new regulations. And as I mentioned earlier, I know it can feel like a lot. Laws are changing all the time. Trust me, HR for Health is in all 50 states. These states keep us on our toes with these new regulations, but it is important to make sure that you're aware of what they are and you're adjusting how you're operating based on those. And then last, but definitely not least, it's forgetting to document employee conversations, performance reviews, write-ups. You always want a paper trail, even if you think something might not turn into a bigger issue. It is always better to be safe than sorry, and be consistent with everybody and how you're holding them accountable and documenting it, which does lead into the financial issues too. Ashley, if you want to highlight those a little bit.
Yeah, so big one, not knowing your numbers, which after today, though, you're going to know how to run these numbers. So don't worry, have your candle out. It's going to be okay after today. But if you don't know your numbers, there can be a lot of risks involved that you just wouldn't know. So understanding those and starting to run those at least every month. And then not having SOPs for each job function is something that's just so important, that especially if we want to rely on a system, not just a person. We always would, in our practice, if an emergency happened and someone didn't come into the office that day, could someone do their job just by the SOP that was in the office? So that's what's really important. And then missing documentation. Documentation is everything when it comes to insurance billing, from your claim status notes to your posting notes. Document how you do the work. So that is critical. And then, these numbers that I'm going to show you, we're going to start knowing and analyzing those every single month. So that way that, nothing surprises us. We know the trends and we can be prepared for them, and we can see problems when they're small problems before they become the big ones.
We want to be preventative. That is the theme of today. So
my dad always said, be proactive, not reactive.
Yep, exactly. It never feels good to be reactive. And again, from somebody who's been in that seat before, even knowing HR, there are things that come up where you're like, wow, how did I not see that coming? I thought I seen it all. And so being proactive is the best seat to be in. So let's talk on the HR side, how we can do this. So as I mentioned, these are the pieces earlier that we see as the most common issues. So the first is the employee classification mistakes. This is very, very, very common. Again, we are onboarding hundreds of clients and we are seeing this is almost always an issue for them. So misclassifying somebody, this could either mean, again, they're classified as a 1099 when they should not be, or they're paid a salary and therefore you think they're automatically an exempt employee, meaning they're exempt from overtime, lunches, breaks, those sort of things. So if we look at the 1099 side, for somebody to be an independent contractor, this person has to be independent. They are making their own schedule. You are not telling them when to come in. They even are bringing their own patients. This is typically a dentist that is doing a different type of work or different type of procedures than what you typically offer. This does vary per state depending on how strict it is, but as a general rule of thumb, this person has to be able to be independent in how they are working with you. You're not telling them when they are coming in. You're not telling them the treatments they're doing. That is a kind of add-on to what the practice is doing. Big pitfall we see here is bringing temps in. We think because somebody is a temporary employee, they should be paid as a 1099, and that is not necessarily the case. We have a lot of resources on this. We partner with a great company, Quickly, which brings in temps as W-2s. They take on a lot of that liability for you in terms of employing those people, but that's definitely a trap that can happen. And the issue with classifying people as 1099 that shouldn't be is that there are two agencies that care about this, right? There's the IRS and then there's the Department of Labor. So it's a big deal to not pay their taxes correctly, to not give them things like unemployment if they should be eligible for it. So definitely something to keep your eye on. If you're sitting here going, Jill, I'm doing that right now, what do I do? Reach out to us. We can help you to walk through like how to switch that, but it's definitely not worth the risk. The other thing is exempt. So a lot of the times the mistake is made that if an employee is paid on a salary, meaning the same amount every single payroll, regardless of how many hours they work, that they are automatically exempt. But the reality of somebody being exempt is that it is based on their job roles, the actual duties that they're doing. So outside of like an associate dentist, which typically falls under the professional exemption, we have to look at, is this person managing more than one person? Are they able to operate kind of independently, making business decisions? Are they able to hire and fire and have a say in that? So what I'm describing is typically like a true office manager in a practice. Everybody else tends to be non-exempt. So that includes your hygienist, that includes your assistants. And so these mistakes of not classifying people bleed over into wage and hour violations because it leads to paying an employee incorrectly. Again, if somebody's a 1099 and they shouldn't be, they're not getting the benefits that they should be getting, like unemployment or sick leave. You also want to make sure that everyone that is non-exempt is clocking in and out, that they're receiving overtime, they're getting lunches and breaks. This is really vital. It is your responsibility as the business to maintain this documentation, to have records of everyone's time that worked. Now, what we see is a lot of practices do not pay every employee just a straight hourly rate. You might be paying them percent production, percent collection, per patient, per day. We see it all. And a lot of the times those people just don't clock in and out because you're using a time clock that might be in your PMS or a payroll system time clock that doesn't understand that type of pay structure. So it's really important to use a time clock that does. HR for Health does understand that. It's doing those overtime calculations. But at the end of the day, you really want to make sure you have that documentation around that timekeeping. Also, you want to have documentation around leaves of absence. Before you even document it, you need to know what the leave of absence that you're responsible for providing. So these are things like pregnancy leave, sick leave, jury duty. There's states that are even rolling out bereavement leave. And all of these requirements, they definitely vary per state or even city or county, but then they even might vary based on the size of your practice and the number of employees that you have. So this is why it's really important to keep up on these law updates. We have so many guides about the laws that change, what to do with them, so that you make sure you're following them, and then you're documenting when somebody does take that leave to show that they were eligible, that you were, following the rules when it came to that. The last thing I'll say is letting your employee handbook grow stale. That is one of the biggest mistakes, and it's also very avoidable. So you want to make sure at least once a year you're updating your handbook, and then you want to make sure you're actually using it. That's another mistake that we see, or a misstep, is we spend all this time writing our policies out, having it all in one place, and then it maybe is sitting in a filing cabinet, or the employee isn't even given it, or you're not following it. So you're creating confusion with what you have in writing as your policies and what you are actually doing. One good example of this is we typically see every single handbook, regardless of where you get it, has a policy around tardiness and says you're not allowed to be late. But it doesn't define what late actually means. Is that 3 minutes for you? Is that 5 minutes? You get to decide what that threshold is, but then you want to make sure you're tracking it, like using a time clock like HR for Health that does flag if they're late or clocking in early, or, if they don't show up at all. So definitely don't overlook your handbook and your policies. Again, we have a ton of resources that are state specific that help you to track this and know what's going on. And if you're a client of HR for Health, which I know some of you on this webinar are, as a reminder, we are automatically updating your handbook as laws change in the platform. So we kind of have that covered for you, but these are the things you want to avoid. The reality is all of this risk starts to culminate when you hire somebody. So we talked about correctly classifying people, but when it comes to actually onboarding, when we start working with a new practice, I want to say 100%, but I don't want to be too overambitious. So I'll say 99% of our practices that we start working with are out of compliance with their onboarding documents. So on average, there's 12 to 15 new hire documents that you need to give each person at the time they start with you. When we start working with a practice, we typically see they have about 3 to 4. So that's something that you can get up to date almost right away, is making sure you have all the documents that you need. This also creates inconsistency because sometimes we assume when somebody has experience in a specific role that we can just throw them into the practice and kind of let them do their thing. But they haven't worked for you before. They haven't worked for your practice before. So it's really important to do those 30, 60, 90-day check-ins, document these along with any performance issues. I also did a webinar a couple months back on how to fire somebody without getting sued. We go really deep into termination mistakes, so I won't go into all of that. Again, that resource is available for you to go back and listen to. But I will say this, 2 things to remember. Do not fall prey to the at-will conspiracy, as I call it. So just thinking because I'm at will, I hear this from doctors all the time, I'm in an at-will state. And the reality is every state is an at-will state except for Montana, which means somebody can quit at any time for any reason or no reason at all. You can fire somebody at any time for no reason at all. It's a trap. That's why we call it the at-will conspiracy. You do still need that documentation. You can't fire somebody for reasons that are protected classes. So this is where this friction starts to happen, because you might be firing somebody because they aren't upholding your policies. There's performance issues, but there's no documentation about that. And then a claim happens and you're on the back foot because they're saying, well, they fired me because I'm old or I'm pregnant or whatever it might be. So really, really important to have that. And then the other thing is the trap of thinking because they're in that 90-day period, that probationary period, introductory period, I can fire them whenever I want. That's also a myth. That probationary period term was made up by human resources people just to kind of monitor that person's uptick of coming in and working for you. It does not mean that they just aren't like a regular employee. You can just fire them for any reason. The at-will conspiracy still plays into that. So just be aware of that. Again, if you're ever going to part ways with somebody, I always recommend having support and doing that, reaching out to our team or another trusted resource so you're not doing that alone. And then last but not least, lack of manager training. And I know Ashley's going to be talking about this, of making sure everyone knows what these systems are and not just dependent on an individual person, but you really have to make sure they have those skills needed to manage and lead your people. So here are some 3 quick tips of how you can address these things. So first, create repeatable HR processes. If you are finding that you're getting asked the same question over and over again, then you don't have a strong policy or process. You're not helping to duplicate yourself. Automating these things is great. Having an automated onboarding system, having a handbook that is digital that the employee can pull up whenever they want, really, really important to help with this. And then, of course, compliant documentation. We're going to talk a lot about that in the next phase of this, of how to make sure you're doing that. And then definitely conducting those HR audits at least once a year. These laws are changing very, very fast. And sometimes it's in April, sometimes it's in October, sometimes it's July. It's always throughout the year. So if you're like not subscribed to our blogs or webinars or newsletters, if you're not a client, make sure you're paying attention to those as we're alerting you of what's happening. All right, so let's jump into the financial risks. Ashley, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so there are some financial risks that are hidden in the everyday operations, specifically in the front office when it comes to the billing. So just like there's HR laws that are changing all the time, and I will say, Jill, I believe some of those conspiracy theories. And
that's always my mission when I co-present with somebody, or like we bring in a new employee
yes,
and train them up, and they're like, wait, I could have totally sued my ex-employer. I'm like, now you're getting it.
right? So it's great. But just like HR laws are changing, insurance rules and regulations, it's always changing. And the current landscape, I'm sure everyone in the audience, if you deal with insurance, you know it's full of its quirks, its pitfalls. Right when you feel like you got it under control, something shifts. That is why it is so important to know your numbers. So these 4 numbers are going to help you just to be able to diagnose, how is my office doing? So the 4 numbers I want you to know after today are going to be your collection percentage, your adjustments, insurance AR, and patient AR. And if we go through today and you're like, wait a minute, I need help, I'm going to give you an opportunity at the end of this. We can do a free practice analysis for your office to see where you stand. So if you end and you're like, I don't know how to do this, it is okay. We have resources for you. Mm-hmm. So the first number is the collection percentage. I want you all, and I want you to get this number. So to get a good stance of where am I at right now, I want you to take the last 3 full months of your total collections, divide that by the same last 3 months of net production. So it's going to be your gross production after your adjustments and write-offs, times that by 100. That's going to give you what your collection percentage has been over the last 3 months. This is a number I want you to do every month. So as we're going, you can do it month to date. You can do it for last month. What we're looking for, though, is 98% or above. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see kind of what's healthy, what's a warning sign, and what's unhealthy. So healthy is 98 or above. If you start getting below that, that's when I want your like tingle senses to start, like something's going on here. I say, even at, 92, you would think might be like an A-. When it comes to collection percentage, it's not. So that means we're not collecting 8% of what we're producing. And we know that overhead is so high in dentistry. We cannot afford to not collect 100% of what we're producing. So that is why collection percentage matters, because we have that overhead, we're paying the team, we're paying the cost to perform the treatment. Are we actually collecting it? That's why this number is so important. And then what this will tell us, if we're under 98%, it's going to tell us, hey, there might be an issue here. So there's 3 areas where your missing money could be. That's going to be in either your adjustments, it's going to be in your insurance AR, or it's going to be in your patient AR. So think of the number as like, is there a problem? Then once you know yes or no, now we know where to dig a little bit deeper from there. So adjustments, this is the first place where your missing money could be. So how do you find your adjustments? So every week, I love if office managers and doctors run their adjustment report so that you know exactly what's being written off in your practice. I will tell you, my own father didn't know how to run certain reports. And so when I would go to his practice, after I'd left his practice, I would go in, run a few reports and be like, oh, I can tell you, here's your problem. And he'd be like, how do you do that? It's just by knowing these few numbers. So the more that you are used to looking at these reports, the easier it's going to be for you to pinpoint, hey, something feels off. So every week, I want you to run your total adjustment report, and it should be broken down by new patient adjustments, insurance adjustments, so that you can take a look at it. And then every adjustment that's done in your system, whoever's posting the payments, whoever is adjusting off, should always have a detailed note on why that adjustment was needed. So whether that was an insurance adjustment, is it because insurance just didn't pay? We need to know why. So healthy is that hopefully it's mostly contractual adjustments. Now, if you are someone that attaches fee schedules in your PMS, you shouldn't have a lot of contractual adjustments because those are pre-done and the ledger reflects the in-network fee. So that is something that's also important to know. Do you attach fee schedules or do you have the full UCR on your ledger? Then that will help you know, is it out of the ordinary how many contractual adjustments we have in our system. Typically, if you're in network, a lot of PPO practice 25 to 35% is going to be adjusted, but it's consistent. So the reason I want you to run this week over week is because what we're looking out for is the outliers, what just doesn't feel right. So when you're reviewing it every week, you're going to just spot check. Hey, this is a $2,000, insurance adjustment. Let me just take a look and see what the notes say. That is what I would love you guys to start doing, just so that you know what your office's trends are. And then if we go into the next slide, we're going to talk about insurance AR. One of my favorite things. I love battling insurance and getting insurance to pay. So ideally, whoever is in charge of your insurance aging, and I always say there should be one team member that is responsible for the insurance AR numbers. It doesn't mean that they're the only person that calls. But what I have found is if one person isn't responsible for it, then nobody's responsible for it. And this is the true for not just insurance AR, but also your patient collections. So make sure that somebody is responsible for these numbers. And then my policy is every single week. So on Monday, I would print my report, my insurance agent report. And what I was going to do is I'm looking for any new claims that aren't there from last week, or any claims that haven't had a phone call in the last 14 to 21 days. If they were on there, I'm giving them a highlight. And then I know, okay, here's 50 claims that I know need to be called on this week. So then if I work 5 days a week, I can break that down into smaller goals. Okay, I'm calling on 10 claims every single day so that my 50 claims are called on for the week. If you don't do this systematically every week, insurance and patient AR will creep up. It doesn't slow down if you don't work it. It just gets harder and harder and harder. And so if you run your report and you realize, hey, my numbers are really high. Rome wasn't built in a day, but take little actions, take little steps to get it down. And ideally, the numbers that we're going to look for, so healthy numbers, I'm looking at your over 90. When we work with offices, we track their insurance AR numbers every single week. I love when offices track their insurance AR and their patient AR outside of the PMS. And I like it when they track it weekly, because then what you can look for are trends. If you just run it today, you're going to get what your AR is as of today. You can't look back to see, hey, what was it 3 months ago? And are we getting better or are we getting worse? That's why I like to track it outside of the PMS, and I like to track it every single week. What you're going to look for, ideally a goal, you're over 90 to be under 5% of your total insurance AR. So that is the goal we're reaching for. Now, if you run it today and you're not there yet, it's okay, but know where you are today, because you can't fix if you don't know where you are today. Does So that's what I urge you, run those numbers and just see where we're starting. And then a warning sign is if we see those numbers that are creeping up over that 5%, and then if we dig into the actual claims, if you find that there's no claim status notes, that is another warning sign. Okay, and then going on to patient AR. So the other half. So half of your collections usually comes from insurance for most offices. The other half is going to come from patients. And so what we're looking for here, again, we want to run these numbers every week, and we want to track these outside the PMS. We're looking for the 90 plus here to be under 10%. Majority of our patient balances, we want it to be in that current to 30 days. Now, if not, again, it's okay, but we need to know our starting point so we can start improving from there. And then we need to know who's responsible for sending statements, who's responsible for, my philosophy, I like patients to get a statement every month. Once they hit a certain point, they're getting a letter, a phone call, a text to pay, so that, every single month they're getting these touches and they're not slipping through the cracks with these balances that just are never collected. It is so much easier to collect a balance the sooner it's a balance. The farther you go away from that data service, the harder it is to get patients to pay that balance. So the sooner the better. And when you run these reports and review this with the team member who's in charge of patient billing, what you want to ask is those questions. Who's gotten a statement? Who's gotten a letter? What kind of outreach has been done to the patients that are on the list? Just like insurance, how many claims have we called on? What have we done? We want the same kind of monthly meeting with who is in charge of patient billing as well. All right, so now let's talk about protecting against embezzlement, because unfortunately it is something that is real and it's the last thing usually people want to talk about. But the good news is there are financial controls that can dramatically reduce your risk. So what do all these three women, what do all these three women have in common? And unfortunately, these are people that were trusted, long-term time employees, all worked in a dental practice. And they embezzled from their doctor. And like I said, my dad was one who was embezzled from. And so that's why, financial controls are not just about distrusting your team. They're not actually at all about distrusting your team, but they're about protecting your practice and everybody also that works in it. So what are some financial controls that you should be doing? So focus on a few simple habits. You want to separate the responsibilities whenever possible. So I'll talk into a little in the next slide on what that looks like. But reviewing that financial activity daily. So are you reviewing your deposit slip every day? We would print our deposit slip every single day. The reason I like to print it, even though everything is digital, I like to print it because I can refer back to. If something's changed in the computer, I can go back to, at the end of the day, what did my deposit slip say that it was? That is why I like printing a deposit slip and making sure every day we would turn that in to my father, my dentist, and we would have the credit cards all matched up. We would have everything reconciled from care credit, any financing, any cash, any checks, any credit cards, and turn it in to him. And that was part of our protection. So are you reviewing your deposit slips every single day? And are we reconciling? Is that a routine that we are reconciling? With care credit, we had to wait a few days after to get what how much we had to take off to finance it. So there's a few days we had to wait to get that final number on the care credit website. But are we reconciling? Is that a routine from the front office to the doctor? And are we monitoring those trends? Again, because if you don't see these deposit slips every day, every week, it's going to be hard for you to notice if something is off. That is why I want you to take control and review these reports. And then in the next slide, make sure that no one person should control the entire process. So even me working at my dad's practice, I still didn't own the whole process. We always separated duties. And that is so important, especially when it comes to handling your money. This is why outsourcing can protect your practice, because you want to separate who is collecting the payments from who is posting them and balancing the deposits. You do not want the same person doing it all. You want to have that built-in accountability that if I'm the one collecting or if I'm the one posting, I'm not the one making sure it balances at the end of the day. That is why it's really important that whoever's collecting money is separated from who's posting those payments or balancing those payments. And then same with reconciling those deposits. So someone reconciling deposits, but then the doctor, the office manager should be reviewing those reports at all times. That's just going to create more accountability, and it's going to make fraud so much harder to hide when you separate out the duties. So most embezzlement isn't discovered because of an audit. Sometimes it is, but a lot of the times it's discovered just because someone noticed something that just didn't add up. And so that is why making these a daily habit and part of your routine is going to be helpful. So reviewing those day sheets. So at the end of the day, before we could leave the office, we had to make sure everything balanced. We printed out the day sheet and we printed out that deposit slip. Everything was reconciled. Then we were allowed to leave for the day. So whoever's posting your payments, just don't wait until the last minute, because I have been there where my checks were off by 2 cents and I had to go in and figure out where the discrepancy is. So don't wait till the end of the day. But that was our policy. We're not leaving the day until we balance, reconciled all our credit card payments. If you take any cash, balancing the cash drawer, confirming deposits, match the posted payments. There are a lot of offices that are not confirming that the deposits match what has been posted. So that is extremely important so that you can find those discrepancies quickly, and that small issues today don't become major issues tomorrow. And it's also wise just to have that policy in your office so the whole team knows that you are somebody that looks into the reports. It is going to make your risk just lessen, knowing that, hey, somebody is actually reviewing this. All right, and then I would love, beyond just the daily tasks, I want you to take a step back every month and look at the trends. So that is where we're going to be looking at the adjustments, the write-offs. We're going to be spot checking it. If I see a high dollar adjustment, I'm just going to double click into it, see what the notes say, see if there's no notes. Then that means maybe we need to create an SOP around how we post payments, how we notate all of our adjustments. EFT deposits. I'll talk in the next section a little more about my EFT tips and tricks, but are we tracking that our EFTs are actually being deposited? Because it is the amount of offices we've come in that accept EFTs, but there's no system in place for them actually to post them into the PMS happens more than you know. So as a doctor, you might think, oh, I'm getting my payments in, but are they going into your practice management software? That's what we want to know. And are they going in a timely manner? Virtual credit card payments. Is this something that we're also reviewing, how insurance is paying us? Looking for those unusual trends and any changes in our collection percentage, because every month we're now reviewing our collection percentage, we're reviewing our insurance AR, and we're reviewing our adjustments in patient AR. So we're going to be able to tell if there has been a trend shift and then diagnose why. All right, so if we go more into the EFT and virtual credit card, some best practices. So I recommend if you accept EFTs, if you haven't set up this way now, it is okay. We have many offices that have a combined bank account that accepts EFTs. But if you haven't set up EFTs yet and you're just wanting to get started, my recommendation is you have a dedicated EFT bank account. So you have a separate account that just accepts your EFTs. It makes tracking your payments so much easier. That is why I recommend it. And you can give your team view-only access to that if you would like, or you could just have access to it. For us, when we post EFTs, we document everything for our offices, and then we give that data to the offices to confirm against their bank account. And then we're reconciling the deposits weekly. We're reviewing every virtual credit card. So I will say my recommendation always opt out of virtual credit cards. We do this for free for our offices. My philosophy is you should not pay to get paid. So you already had to write off. I want to get as much as I can, and insurance companies making me pay to get paid just makes me mad a little bit inside. So my recommendation, opt out of virtual credit cards. Legally, they have to offer you a free way to get paid. So whether that is directly going through EFT through the payer, sometimes if you use a third party that makes it convenient to get EFT payments from multiple insurance companies, they're going to charge you 2-3% to do that convenient way of getting paid by EFT. So find your free way to get paid. That's the way I recommend to go with. So opt out of virtual credit cards because you're having to pay that merchant fee to swipe that card. And there is a lot of embezzlement risk accepting virtual credit cards. So I won't go into too much detail, but just protect your practice and opt out of virtual credit cards if you can. And yes, financial risk, it's usually not one big event. It usually doesn't happen overnight. It's usually the result of just one misreconciliation, one unchecked adjustment, maybe one person having too much control. That's also a bit of a flag. Not to say that you're not to trust your team member, but when they have control of everything when it comes to your money, it can just open you up to more risk. And it's more liability. What if an emergency happens and the one person that did everything isn't there? And we have had so many offices call us with that panic of my one person who did billing is gone. I don't know what to do. So protect yourself by not having just one person in control of it all. And honestly, it's a very difficult job to have one person doing it all well with the way insurance has become. And then also just making sure there's not one unusual trend that goes unnoticed. So running these reports, running these numbers is what's going to help you just to notice any changes to your office.
I have to share a story of one of our clients. I mean, we've had clients, of course, that have, fallen victim to being embezzled from, but one story always sticks out to me of there was a doctor that was very hands-off, was just focused on the treatment and clinical side. And the front office was really kind of running the show. And the payments were being collected with, remember when they had the PayPal Stripe thing that you could hook into your phone and swipe your credit card? And a patient said to him oh my gosh, that's so cool now that you're collecting payments via PayPal. And he's like, what? He had no idea. And so this employee was it would be one for the practice and one for me. It was swiping the PayPal swipe on her phone. So, and he had no idea until a patient said something as a compliment. And he's like, what are you talking about? And that made him look into it. So you never know.
You don't. And they are crafty. They come up with ways if, it's unfortunate. But if you know your numbers, you'll know. Just your spidey senses will just tell you more, hey, something doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about where these risks kind of overlap. And there's a lot of similarities between these pitfalls that happen. And a lot of it, again, is around weak systems. So like Ashley was talking about on both the financial side and just, again, on the HR side and your expectations for how your employees are operating, if you don't have it written down, if you have not told them what is expected of them, whether that's, again, a performance thing or just a straight SOP of what steps are supposed to be taken, like Ashley is talking about of, this is the way that we're going to document this type of note in this system. If you don't have that written down, you can't expect the employee to know that that's what is expected of them. And so that can create misalignment from an employee performance perspective and, of course, risk from an oversight perspective. The inconsistent processes also play into that. So it's well, this person I really trust, this person does a great job, but this person I'm going to treat in a certain way because I don't trust them yet and I'm going to kind of micromanage them, or I'm not going to have any oversight because I trust them. And again, this is a trap that we see a lot. It creates a kind of contention between the team. I will never forget, years ago, I was doing a seminar and a doctor raised their hand and said, what should I do about cell phone use in my office? Because my front office person is super great and she's on her phone and I don't really care about it, but my assistants are on their phones and it drives me crazy. And it was you're just creating inconsistency in terms of what they're seeing you do when you hold people accountable and who can get away with stuff. And employees are always going to kind of push those boundaries and see what they can either get away with, or they're just not sure of what's expected of them. So it's really important to have these check-ins with them to make sure that you're holding them accountable with these systems that you're rolling out, and not just kind of like flying by the seat of your pants. When it comes to making an employment decision, if an employee is asking for time off or asking for anything from you, and you're sitting there going, should I do this or not? The question you need to ask yourself is, am I willing to do this again for everybody? And if the answer is no, you probably shouldn't do it. If the answer is yes, then feel free to do it. So again, best questions to ask yourself, especially as things are coming up frequently, if you're having employee issues, is it documented? Who owns it? And then how am I going to audit this? How am I going to pay attention to it? Some warning signs that should prompt to look closer. So policy violations that are not documented or addressed. So if you have a certain way that you expect an employee to operate, so think of your employee handbook as like the constitution for the office and their job description as like their individual expectation. Both are super important. Both are really important to hold the team accountable with, so they know what is expected of them. If you don't have those things, if you're not using it, that is a prompt to look into that closer. And actually, like I talked about earlier, using those policies. So if you have a policy in there that you're not following, that you're not doing, don't have it in there. I just did a podcast last week with somebody, and she worked in a multi-location office, and she was saying that her very first office that she worked in the employee handbook, it said everybody has to have white shoes. And so she like went out, she bought white shoes for herself, shows up to the office the first day, nobody else is wearing white shoes. So she's like, what the heck? Why did I just go spend money on these shoes where clearly it doesn't matter for everybody? So even things like that just can create distrust, and they see like you're not paying attention, you're not investing in making sure that things are running smoothly. And Ashley, do you have anything else to chime in on this piece too?
Yeah, no, I think the key thing that you said there is just even the idea of having your team know that you're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's so important. And so many dentists, even my own father, was so hands off when it came to the front office, which is great to trust your team, but you also need to be the leader. And even if you need to fake it till you make it in the beginning, even if you run the reports and you don't know what you're looking at, run the reports and have them turn them into you, because you don't want that idea getting out that hey, I don't know what's going on. So just start there.
Yeah. And I think that if we're looking at really having this culture of like transparency and accountability, like it does start with, again, expectations at the point that they come into the practice for the first time. We're going to have 30, 60, 90-day check-ins. I do annual reviews. I have a one-on-one with you once a week or once every other week. And then you uphold that. And that's where the pieces that Ashley's talking about of building these systems, building these expectations, and making sure they're followed is you're already setting up the expectations of, I'm going to be checking in with you and we're going to be reviewing this piece so that they know what to expect. But then you actually have to do it. You definitely do not want to tell them that you're going to have check-ins, you're going to be doing these reviews and then not do them, because it creates a lot of ambiguousness for them. And they're like, okay, did they forget? Am I not important? Did they lie to me? Absence of information, we make up our own stories. And really trying to focus on, have I put out there exactly what I expect? Like, take it from me. When I started with HR for Health all these years ago, there was 5 people in the company. We are now way bigger than that. And I have personally hit that wall time and time again and learned the hard way over the years of like, there's so much in my brain. There's so much that I have learned about how our business functions that I have to make sure that that is on paper, that that's adjusted as I am delegating responsibilities, as I'm delegating trust. And so it's like trust, but verify. And again, Ashley, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
So true. I'll say even the accountability piece, like having those meetings, I know for me, I structure those meetings with my father to go over the insurance aging, the patient aging reports every month, because I knew I needed that accountability. Mm-hmm. There's so much that pops up in my day-to-day that if I knew I had to present these numbers and review all these claims and review all these patient accounts at the end of the month, oh, trust me, my calls are gonna I'm gonna stick more to what I know needs to get done, just because in dentistry, so many things pop up in the day to day that having that just anchor of I'm gonna report on these numbers was helpful for me as the employee. I need the built-in accountability. So, sometimes it can be scary of like, oh, having people report these numbers to me, but I'm telling you, as someone who needed to report my numbers to someone, it's really helpful for the team member to just know the expectations. And it sets them up for success so much better than just letting them, do whatever and never having to report back.
Yeah, because everybody thinks that they're doing a good job. People aren't trying to come to work and do a bad job, but you need that interactive piece to know that they're on the right path. And so as we kind of wrap up this section, what we wanted to surface for you are these are some like initial questions to kind of ask yourself to get a kind of pulse check on where you're at right now. So those pieces that Ashley was talking about, do I have these things clearly written out in an SOP? Are the responsibilities separated? Am I following the processes that are from both the HR perspective, from the leave of absence perspective, from clocking in and out, from all of those like nuisance things that I know stress you out? Is like, well, do I have it in writing, and then am I actually following it? Because that's a great place to start. And again, you can start small. Think of the top 2 or 3 things that really are just grinding your gears right now of how the employees are functioning, and address those and get some clarity around them, roll out new policies, and then make sure that you're, supporting them on that. And, if you were to be audited, if something were to be challenged by an employee, do you have that supporting documentation that is going to stand up and not be, emotional or subjective, but really objective, black and white, of what either the expectations are, how that fell short. And can we identify a problem before it became costly? Like, I think, Ashley talking a lot about doing this weekly and monthly, that repetition is so important, because you don't know what is wrong unless you know your trends, like unless you know what's normal, unless you're seeing what's moving the needle. It's just super important. So again, Ashley, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Oh, that's perfect.
Awesome. So as we promised you, we do have a new resource that we just launched that was co-created by our 2 companies that is kind of a roadmap for you to put a 90-day plan in place. So if you scan this QR code, you'll be able to download that resource. We can also send it as a follow-up in an email for you if you need it. But this is, again, kind of a great place to start taking next steps. And on that same vein, if you're not familiar with it, HR for Health puts on an event each year called the Dental Leadership Summit. This year it's in Austin from September 16th through 18th. And I'm super, super excited because Ashley is going to be doing a deep dive kind of hands-on workshop of this webinar. Really address what you need to be aware of, what are the things you need to look at. And this session is going to be how do you address it, really getting into the nitty-gritty. So if you scan this QR code, you can register. Because you're on this webinar, you can use this you can use this discount code that gives 50% off your ticket. Ashley, anything you want to tease to them about what you're going to be going through?
I will just say, so this webinar was hard because I feel like I talked a lot about here's how to diagnose the problem, but I want to tell you how to fix it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm really excited about this workshop is we're going to really get nitty gritty into what should the SOPs be? Mm-hmm. How should we be sending out clean claims? What should our documentation look like? Mm-hmm. How do you help me with my aging if there's an issue? So I'm really excited to just do a deep dive on all right, what can we walk away with and have some quick wins when you get back to your office?
Yeah. And that's really the theme of our entire event is it's not panels where you're kind of listening to a lot of people just talk and not being able to interact. All of the sessions are really hands-on, hour and a half, deep dives into whether it's this topic, marketing, bringing on associates, how to budget for new hires. It's really kind of getting into the weeds with you so you have those actionable takeaways. So really excited to have you joining us there too. It's going to kind of be a continuation of that. So again, scan the QR code. You can register using this discount code to get a nice little discount on behalf of Wisdom. So with our last few minutes, any questions?
We did have, so I will say Taylor has been a beast in the answering the questions.
Has she?
So
we have Taylor, our team member behind the scenes, who is amazing. I've seen the questions come in. I can't see anything other than my screen that I'm sharing. So anything that you think we should go over?
So there's a few. So one on how do you track outside of the PMS was a question. So in regards to the numbers, I am a Google lady, so I love a Google sheet. That's how I personally love to track things. I feel like it's very easy. You could also use an Excel sheet. Anything like that. The reason I like an Excel or a Google sheet is I like to put in my equations, especially for that over 90 to populate, is it under the 5% goal? So I set up a few equations like that. If you're working with us, we track it for our offices, but if you're tracking on your own, my go-to would be Google Sheet.
And Google Sheet's nice too, because it shows like an audit trail. Like if something's changed, you could look back at like previous versions, which has been a lifesaver for me.
Yes. Oh, Sheila's asking, can you show that QR code again? I'm guessing the 90-day download.
This one or the 90-day?
Yeah. Perfect. And then someone else said, no VCC, amen. Yes, Kendra, no virtual credit card. And then Dawn asks, our office works with your team Wisdom. I'm so excited you're here, Dawn.
Oh, awesome.
When your team posts payments, are these payments already deposited prior to being posted? I'm trying to figure out the best way. Really good question. So if you're working with our team, so if we are posting your EFTs, yes, we wait until the deposit date is at least current so that it's posted. Then we post it and we track it with all of the EFT details separately so that you have it. If it is checks that you're getting to the mail, that's something that you would scan to our office, and then we post it next business day. So typically you're going to scan it to us and then deposit it. So, and that's too, no matter whether you outsource or not, separating who's posting and who's handling the money though is so important. But Dawn, if you have any more questions about that, just let me know.
Okay. All the other ones we got to?
We got some more coming in. The problem with 5% over 90 rules, that depends on how often the office write off amounts that are truly uncollectible. If you never clean those up, your over 90 keeps growing, even though you're doing a good job in collections. David, that is a really good point. So you want to make sure too that you don't have just old claims sitting there. We see this a lot that are 5 years old. If they cannot be collected, you want to clean up your report, because what I call a dirty report that's just pages and pages long, it's going to be harder for you to actually get the money that's collectible if you have a lot of the money that's uncollectible there. Same with your patient balances. If you have a lot of old 5-year plus patient balances, even if you don't want to write them off, change the billing type so they're not messing up or dirtying your report, so that your report is the most current. Even if you're over the timely filing though, if you have proof of original filing of that claim, you can a lot of time get it paid with an appeal. So reach out to us if you have questions about that.
Okay. So as we wrap up, again, if you're not a client or not as familiar with HR for Health, our goal is to prevent employee issues from happening, to make employee management very easy. So everything from onboarding, like I was mentioning, the new hire documents, you onboard somebody, they're automatically sent every single new hire document that they're supposed to fill out and sign on their first day, to the employee handbook, to job descriptions, clocking in and out, time off requests, performance reviews, violations, payroll. We are here to, from onboarding to offboarding, make it as easy as possible, help you keep up on any laws that are changing so that you're aware of it. And then also bringing in great partners like Wisdom. And Ashley, I'll let you talk about what these QR codes before we log off.
Yes, so I promised at the beginning about a free complimentary practice analysis. So if you want to see or find your missing revenue, the QR code on the left will offer that for you. No charge. You also get a $50 gift card to chat with us. So my goal, I really want to help dentists find the money that's going under collected. And most offices, when we run this, we find their collection percentage much under what they expected it to be. So we have that on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is our ebook to do your own dental billing self-audit, where we just go a little more detailed on how to run that. So either do one or both of this, whatever you choose, though, don't leave today without picking one to at least take advantage of these free resources, because we want to help you and we want to talk to you if you need the help.
And we are right on time. We were so worried that we were going to go over, and we are spot on. So here, just kind of as a final wrap up, is both HR for Health's information, Wisdom's information. Please reach out to us if you have questions, if you're dealing with any of these issues, if you're just want like a little health check. HR for Health does a risk assessment, just kind of like Wisdom was describing. So let us know how we can help. Thank you so much for being on this webinar. It flew by, so much great information, and I cannot wait to have you with us in Austin in September to continue the conversation.
Thank you, guys.